Well, hello! We are finally back for some more Big Damn Love. And this episode, we are taking a trip back to 1987 for a horror movie that's a bit different. The 80s was a real boom period for the villain-led horror franchise, some of which continue to this day, as 70s movies like Halloween spawned an increasing number of sequels, and newer characters like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees and Chuck S snowballed in popularity. The market was filled with maniacs and monsters leering from posters and VHS covers. It almost became a genre unto itself, one I like to call mascot horror movies. One of the most visually striking of these mascots was and remains Pinhead, the face of the Hellraiser series. Hellraiser, released in 1987, was written and directed by Clive Barker, adapted from his novella The Hellbound Heart. Barker had been displeased with how his previous screenplays Underworld and Rawhead Rex had turned out under the direction of George Pavlou, and he resolved to bring his work to the screen himself. Despite his lack of experience behind the camera, Barker managed to create a film that still holds up as a classic of the genre. The film opens with deviant sadomasochist Frank Cotton purchasing and opening a mysterious puzzle box, which summons a group of beings who torture him to death and beyond, before returning whence they came. Frank's brother Larry and his wife Julia soon move into the house where, unbeknownst to them, Frank died.
He's here.
Well, he's been here. He's obviously made one of his famous getaways.
And some accidentally spilt blood opens the door for Frank to return. Julia, who had a brief affair with Frank before his death, begins to lure victims to the house so Frank can reconstitute himself, and Larry's daughter Kirsty begins to suspect her stepmother's up to something strange, leading her to an encounter with the mysterious box and the creatures it summons. In my mind, Hellraiser stands apart from other horror movies, particularly modern mainstream ones, in its relative lack of reliance on big jump scares. The most horrific scenes and images in the film play out slowly with a greater emphasis on atmosphere than frights. And certainly there are frightening and shocking moments in the film, but not because they leap out of the darkness at you. I mean, that does happen, and I'll freely admit that the sequences with the engineer are the film's weakest, partly due to budget constraints on the visual effects team, and partly due to it being unclear what the hell's going on. Now, this film is at its best when it's exploring the death and resurrection of Frank Cotton and the strange proclivities of Pinhead and his Cenobites in fascinating detail. It's a story that revolves around the pleasures of the flesh and where the line between them and pain blurs. It's a delight that so much of the visuals hold up. There's an appropriate fleshiness to the effects, and combined with the gothic tinge production design, the themes of the narrative live in the look of the film as well as the story. Yes, there are monsters and murder and mutilation, but make no mistake, this film is really a very dark and twisted romance. A love triangle with two polar opposite brothers vying for the affections of the deeply repressed and mercurial Julia, played brilliantly by veteran of the British stage Claire Higgins. A woman with an icy veneer over a tempestuous inner passion. Julia and Frank's connection is lustful, animal and raw, and Larry's gentle affection can't help but wilt in the heat of their taboo tryst. Even when Frank is newly resurrected, all exposed meat and dripping blood, Julia cannot resist her desire for him.
Like love. Only real.
This is a horror film all about sex. Kinky, weird sex.
Come with us, taste our pleasures.
And that's where the film's most enduring imagery comes in. The Cenobites.
Demons to some, angels to others.
The Cenobites have explored all the extremities of sensation, painful and pleasurable, and are more than happy to share the results of these expeditions with any who open the box. taking great inspiration from what was in the 80s, a burgeoning underground of body modification, as well as various types of sexual fetishism. The Cenobites are simultaneously repulsive and fascinating. Doug Bradley as Pinhead, simply named lead Cenobite here, became the scarred face of the franchise thanks to his commanding presence and also just having all the best lines.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
But all four of the original Cenobite designs seen here have become iconic in their own right. The female Cenobite with her yonic neck wound, the butcheresque Butterball, and the dentist nightmare Chatterer are every bit as memorable as Pinhead. The amount of black leather and exposed pale flesh give a visual continuity to the otherwise unique creatures, and their various details are endlessly fascinating despite the implied horror of their origins. The name Cenobite means member of a religious order, making them a sect of depraved monks. Pinhead is their priestly leader, his leather skirt mimicking and mocking a reverend's gown. It's an explicit connection in the original novella and its sequel, The Scarlet Gospels, with Pinhead being known as the Hell Priest of the Order of the Gash. But here the audience is left to draw this conclusion from the visuals alone. A great example of how this film avoids insulting its audience's intelligence in ways the later sequels unfortunately would.
Well, excuse me.
Now, I've mentioned Claire Higgins and Doug Bradley, but I'd be doing a disservice to the rest of the cast if I left them out. Andrew Robinson is painfully pathetic as the doormat Larry, playing it against type, but he gets to show his range in the third act as events come to a head.
Jesus, what a scene.
Frank is a composite performance, with Sean Chapman playing him before his death and Oliver Smith taking over as Frank the Monster, delivering a creepy portrayal underneath thick, full-body makeup. As a combination, they make Frank a brilliantly despicable beast.
Come to Daddy.
Get the fuck off of me!
Finally, this is the film debut of Ashley Lawrence as Larry's daughter Kirsty, who's the closest thing this franchise has to a recurring heroine. She appears in one form or another in 4 of the 10 films to date. She's a warm and likeable presence, instantly charming but with an underlying strength. In the original novella, Kirsty's not Larry's daughter but a close friend with an unrequited affection for him. The change to being related to Frank and Larry and the sexual threat Frank poses plays further into the subtext of forbidden sexuality, adding incest to the collection of taboos on Frank's list of perversions, and tying into the theme of depravity in the pursuit of pleasure.
Whatever Frank did was unspeakable. Unspeakable.
These themes also carry through into Christopher Young's lush score, full of foreboding but also yearning. Clive Barker had originally wanted experimental group Coil to provide the soundtrack, but the initial work they did was rejected by the studio and the project given over to Young. Coil's work is certainly interesting and well worth a listen if you can find it, but I personally prefer Young's rich orchestral tapestry. While some lament the change, I believe the score really fits with the visuals of the film and helps to elevate the whole to another level of atmosphere. This is probably best exemplified in the gruesome scene of Frank's initial reformation. Larry's spilt blood, hungrily consumed by the floor his brother died on, rejuvenates his brother's hellbound heart. Sorry, couldn't resist. Frank's body slowly, achingly begins to come together again. Bone by bone, tendon by tendon, nerve by nerve. As we are treated to this gory rebirth, Young's score whirls up a gothic carousel of jangly piano and anxious strings, bolstered by angry brass as Frank literally pulls himself together. This all culminates in a first painful scream of life as the music comes to a head. It's a wonderful example of the way this film balances elegance with revulsion, and a perfect distillation of what makes me love this film so much. The success of Hellraiser led to a sequel in short order, and so the series continued. Sadly, each iteration strayed further and further away from the elements that made the original such a classic. As such, the series has gone on to earn a reputation as a run of trashy, generic, cheap, straight-to-video horror flicks, disposable and unremarkable. But this first film is something far more worthy of your time. Strange, disturbing, and yet somehow beautiful. Hellraiser is a true horror classic, unafraid to embrace the unusual and stand apart from its contemporaries. There are many pleasures to be had here. all you have to do is open the box.
It's just a puzzle box!
Oh no.
If you want to give Hellraiser a look, I would highly recommend this Arrow Video Blu-ray release, which I will link below. It's a gorgeous transfer of the original movie and a whole glut of great features, so check it out. And that's it for this episode of Big Damn Love. Please subscribe for more stuff from me and Chris here on the Big Damn channel, including the Big Damn Cast every Friday, here and wherever good podcasts are found. If you want to get in touch, you can leave a comment below or holler at me and Chris at Big Damn Cast on Twitter or bigdamncontact@gmail.com. See you next time.
We'll tear your soul apart.